incident was about to take place that would shake the foundations of the civilized world.
It is time to open your mind. Time to discover your divine self as we navigate this holographic matrix together. Strap in, Cosmic Family, as we slide through this wormhole of cosmic information together in search of the truth.
You can't handle the truth!
It's time to go inside the Matrix. With your host, Jimmy Brent.
All right, welcome once again to Inside the Matrix. My guest today is Dr. Alan Keyes. He's an American conservative patriot, political activist, lecturer, author, and former ambassador. A graduate of Cornell University and a doctoral graduate of Harvard University, Dr. Keyes began his diplomatic career in the U.S. Foreign Service in 1979 at the United States Consulate in Bombay, India, and later in the American Embassy in Zimbabwe. He was appointed ambassador to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations by President Ronald Reagan and served as Reagan's Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs from 1985 to 1987. In his capacities as a UN ambassador, Dr. Keyes was involved in the implementation of the Mexico City policy. He hosted a radio call-in show, The Alan Keyes Show, America's Wake Up Call, from 1994 until 1998 on WCBM. The show was simulcast by National Empowerment Television. In 2002, he hosted a television commentary show on the MSNBC cable network called Alan Keyes is Making Sense. He has also been a columnist for WorldNet Daily. His new internet media network is IAMTV.us. And the show that he hosts on that network is called Let's Talk America. So, Dr. Keyes, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's so great to have you here. And last time I saw you, we were at the G. Edward Griffin's Red Pill Expo in Mesquite.
Yes, I really enjoyed being with y'all. and the talks we had. That was a good conference, met a lot of good folks there.
Yeah, it was really a great conference, and it's so nice to, be around like-minded people. Now, if you would, please, I always ask our guests on the show to kind of give us a background on where you came from, what part of the country, what was your family like, just kind of give us a feel for how you were raised and that kind of thing.
Well, I think that the most important thing to say from the get-go about my upbringing is that I was an Army brat. It always is a little difficult when people say, what part of the country were you raised in and so forth, because I was raised in different parts of the country. Essentially, being an Army brat means that every time the soldier gets sent here or there, it's very likely to be the case, unless they're going into a war zone, that you will follow wherever that person is being stationed, right, or posted.
Yep.
And so I started out life I used to tell people, by the way, when I was asked when I was younger, and they said, where are you from? I'd often say New York City, because I was born in a hospital in Queens. At least it was there then. And of course, I then ended up, as you noted in my little bio that you gave, I ended up at Cornell University at one point, right? Mm-hmm. Cornell is in upstate New York, but there are a lot of people who go to Cornell who actually come from New York City. Now, of course, I used to say I was from New York City. I had relatives there and all of that. I was born there, but I had never really lived there. We would go back every now and again and visit, but I mostly lived. I mean, in the course of growing up, I think I lived in Augusta, in New Jersey, and Augusta, Georgia. We went overseas to Verona, Italy for 3 years. When we came back from that, I think my father was at that point at Fort Myer in Virginia, so we were there. We moved briefly to Baltimore while he was still serving there. Then we went down to Texas. And so I was, hither, thither, and yon during the time that I was growing up. But when I got to Cornell and I said I was from, New York City, people used to, and by the way, all the time I was in the Army, our APO, as they say, where people would send you mail when you were hither and thither and yon, was in New York. It was especially in Italy, and when my father's overseas, the APO is New York City.
Mm-hmm.
So when I said that, people, of course, started talking about New York, and I didn't know that much about it. I quickly learned that I should, sort of be upfront about the fact that where I'm really from is a kind of movable small town called an army base, and it can pop up in different parts of the country or even the world. And that's very formative, because at one and the same time, you kind of get used to having to move away from people that you've grown to know and like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a difficult aspect of that kind of life. But at the same time, you get used to having to right away fit in with new people.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that sort of stabilized it a bit was that wherever you went, being an Army brat is a little bit like living in a small town. It doesn't change. The components of your small town always include the commissary, the movie theater, the church, and so forth on the base.
Right.
And so it's both something that requires that you develop the ability to adjust to changing circumstances, but it also gives you a feeling in a way that your circumstances don't change, if you see what I mean.
Sure. And I would think that all of that would give you a really broad spectrum, being able to see a lot of different, and especially being over in Europe, different cultures and being exposed to different parts of the country would really give you a much better and wider perspective on things.
Well, I think it does. There is something you miss, though. And I think that as an adult, one of the things I strove to do, for better or worse, because of that upbringing, was to stabilize my children's environment. So that my kids essentially were raised, all three of them, in an environment where they pretty much lived in the same area. Maybe not the same place in that area, but within miles of it, while they were growing up, so that they would have friends when they got to be older that they had known all their lives, right?
Right.
Because that's something I didn't really have. And so I suppose that did influence some aspects. But on the other hand, I think it also meant that, and maybe this is a little difficult for politics and government, which I ended up being in, but on the other hand, maybe not, because I don't feel like I'm from this state or that state. If you ask me where I feel like I belong, it's in the United States of America. I'm an American, and I don't have a strong sense that as I move around the country, my identity is attached here or there. And I think that stood me in good stead in some ways, and perhaps not in others. I don't know, but that's the way. It's the sense I have. Every part of this country, and I think what I did in my political life and my governmental thing also helped to cement that, because I've been all over the country and met a lot of people from all over the country and so forth. And so now I really feel like if somebody asks me what's your fundamental identity, it's basically I'm a follower of Jesus Christ and I'm an American.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. I've lived in 4 different states, and I have that same sort of sense where I feel like I'm an American, and I'm happy to be in this country, although, we're definitely not a perfect country by any means. We've made a lot of mistakes, but we also have a constitution which really changed the entire world. It was unprecedented as far as we know. History is up for grabs sometimes, but as far as we know, it's unprecedented in the type of government that we originally had set up. Now, I would say, though, that we have gone a long ways from that, and I know that you're quite familiar with that, and you've studied the Founding Fathers.
Well, I've spent a lot of time. As a matter of fact, that got to be my preoccupation. It was the main focus of my education once I got, late high school and into college. That became a focus of my attention, and pretty much has been ever since. It's always an ongoing process, but that's what I emphasized when I was an undergraduate at Harvard. That's what I emphasized when I was doing my graduate work. I wrote my dissertation on basically Alexander Hamilton's contribution to the founding and especially to the Constitutional Convention, and so spent a lot of time looking at that, and it was part of dealing with something you mentioned, because I came along in the 60s in terms of being born in the 50s. You're coming of age, as it were, right? Somewhere toward the end of the 50s into the 60s. So the 60s, when all of the civil rights movement things, it started sort of in the mid to late 50s and then came to a head with the Civil Rights Act and other kinds of things.
Yes.
And the whole time I was growing up, that was going on. And of course, you can't be a Black American in that environment, but that you're wrestling with the fact that the focus is on something bad about the United States from your perspective, right?
Yes.
Slavery and what your ancestors went through and facts about me. My name, Alan Keyes, right? Is a reminder of that heritage, because it's actual. I'm called Keyes because I guess it would be my great-great-grandfather was a slave on the Key plantation. And I remember when my father first talked to me about this, he was very interested in all of that, right? It's part of why I took a great interest in it at one point, because that often happens, right? You learn certain things and take an interest in them because it's what you're learning from your parents. And he talked to me about the fact that where we lived in Montgomery County, Maryland at the time was where the family on his side, we had relatives there, and we had folks in. My grandmother lived in Baltimore, and when we were living in Montgomery County or in the Virginia, Maryland area, the road that runs from Fredericksburg, Maryland, I guess it is, down to Washington, D.C., is the road my great-grandfather would take to visit his to-be wife, right?
Okay.
But anyway, to make a long story short, I'm called Alan Keyes. It was originally spelled Keys. My father changed it when he went into the military, but the S originally was an apostrophe S, because that was a way of identifying. People who were being held on a plantation in slavery were identified very often by their owner's name, yes, as a possessive. So your first name, your name was Sam, say, and you'd be Keyes Sam, the Sam that belonged to the Keyes plantation. And so he was telling me about all of this stuff. Now, as I got older, somewhere around the time I was 12, 13, 14, I started reading about it and became quite, well, I don't want to use the word obsessed, but very preoccupied. And so for several years, I just was trying to learn all I could about slavery, things that had been written about the experience of slaves and so forth. And I look back on it, and part of me doesn't understand quite what I was doing, because it was very painful.
Sure.
And it breaks your heart, but it also makes you really angry. And you have to find a way, and that's what I spent part of my time doing all through my adolescence and into college. Alan was figuring out how to cope with that anger. And the anger, I think, puts you in a position where you're really tempted to hate the United States and hate what's going on, hate what happened, and so forth and so on. But I think also, at least in part thanks to the influence of my father, I was led to, because my name is Alan L. Keyes. That's how I usually sign it. But the L is for Lee. And it was about the same time that he was talking to me about all these things that he told me that, because he asked me at one point, do you know why your middle name is Lee? And I said, well, no, not really. And I expected an explanation, had something to do with family or this and that. He says, well, you're named after Robert E. Lee. Now, you remember who Robert E. Lee was, right?
Sure.
Robert E. Lee was the general of the Confederacy.
Yep.
And I couldn't believe that. I said, why would you name your child after a guy who fought for the South in the Civil War? And his response was, and remember, he's a soldier, right?
Right.
And he is somebody who had been in battle, who had fought for his country in all the major wars during my lifetime. He was in World War II, he was in Korea, he was in Vietnam,
Wow.
and so forth. He risked his life a lot, ended up, and was very kind of modest about it, in the sense that he had been given a Bronze Star, on the Bronze Star, and several Purple Hearts in the course of his military career, which I didn't learn about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because though he talked about military stuff, and he talked about sometimes not very often, but sometimes about this or that experience he had in the military, he was not a boastful man. He was a strong, sometimes tough disciplinarian, but he wasn't somebody who kind of, I don't know, reveled in war or anything. A matter of fact, I think it was he was actually a man whose temperament was not well suited to war. But at the same time, that was his vocation. It was a way that when he was younger, he saw it as a way to get into an environment where he could learn, get discipline, and not be drawn into what was quite common for people. He was from Baltimore originally, also lived in New York City, and it was quite common for black folks to get drawn into things that aren't very healthy for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he chose, I think, the military career as a way of avoiding that. And at the same time, of course, developing discipline in his life. He learned skills. He was part of the Signal Corps, as they call it. So he got into electronic stuff and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the upshot was that he explained to me that the reason he named me after Robert E. Lee was that he had, as all black people do, I think, the same feelings. But when he was studying things from a military point of view, you, of course, have to take seriously. Robert E. Lee was one of the greatest generals in the history of the United States. And he fought for the wrong side.
Mm-hmm.
But my father studied him because he was a great general. And as his vocation was military stuff, he had to understand military things. And I was led by his interest and what came to be his admiration for Lee. He was able to see the good qualities in people, even though he despised things that they were doing or standing for, right?
Yes.
And in Lee's case, fighting for. And I think that quality struck me. And it took me the longest time before but it planted a seed that was the seed that ultimately allowed me to look at America and try to learn what it was all about. Not just the things that were hateful and painful to me, but the whole thing. And that's why I spent so much time studying it. And as I did, I think you first learn to love America when you start appreciating what the country was founded to stand for.
Yes.
Right? And that plays into why the Civil War came to a head and was fought, as it was, and you learn something about that. But over the course of my life, it also opened my eyes to the fact that if there was evil in America, the evil came to an end, by and large, or was fought at least, so that things improved, because there were so many good people in America.
Yes.
And people who had a hard time themselves, but who were coming from a perspective that thought, when push comes to shove, that justice and decency and right doing were important. And I think that was what reinforced another aspect of my life that mainly I think I owe a great deal to my mother, which is my Christian faith. Mm-hmm. America was a good country because a lot of people in America were Christian people who at the end of the day could be moved and persuaded and led to guilt and shame and revulsion and action when they realized that what they were doing was not in accordance with their love of Christ.
Yeah, I think something that's sorely lacking in our country and really worldwide is that moral compass. I mean, it seems more and more people are rediscovering it or maybe just reaffirming it. But our leaders, by and large, are just so incredibly, insane. Many of them, in Congress and even the Senate. it's just mind-boggling what these people think and do, and they definitely don't have any kind of a moral compass, and that is what has gotten into some horrendous things, for our country.
And it's a deep shame because and this gets us, I think, to the heart of a very serious part of our present crisis. We are a nation that, if you look at the simple reality of it, over the course of the 240 years of our existence, we have come to be not so much a melting pot as a gathering place for people from all over the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why did that happen? Well, it happened because insofar as the founding premises rejected the ideas that were fundamental to despotic, oligarchic, tyrannical, absolutism, and totalitarian rule, people saw America as a place where you could come and follow a path that you had chosen, right?
Yes.
And be allowed to rise and flourish, and not only take care of yourself, but maybe get involved in your country and leadership and all these things that had been reserved to special classes or to military conquerors and all of this. People, ordinary folks, could be part of all of that and see themselves as a decisive part when they came to the United States. And I think that attracted a lot of people here.
Yeah.
And they thought that they could not only make a life, but make a life that had the dignity that goes along with being responsible for yourself and your community. I think it drew a lot of people to these shores from everywhere. Everywhere they got wind of it. People often think they just came because they were greedy and wanted money. I don't believe that's true. Because when a lot of folks came here from all different backgrounds, they were coming into an environment that was going to be really challenging, where nobody was going to give you a handout when you came on our shores. You were going to have to get out there, work hard, defend yourself, fend for yourself, and go through all kinds of difficulties, including for just about every group, some form of discrimination and rejection, right?
Yep.
And why would they go through that when they could have found a much more comfortable oppression in their own countries and stayed where they are? They went through it because there was the hope not only of material betterment, but of respect for the person that they became as a result of taking those responsibilities seriously.
Absolutely. And I think all human beings long to be free and to live in a society where they can prosper by their own efforts. And this is something that we're facing now, is we have got all these globalists who want to turn us into this even more of a government monster controlled society where they will determine our education. They will determine our courses of action according to how, they want it. And that is just the opposite of what we're looking for and what most people that come to this country are looking for. And this is why we all have to stand up. Those of us who are able to see what's happening, like yourself, we really have to stand up for this. And anyway, that first segment is just flown by. We only have a few seconds left. We're going to take a short break. You're listening to Inside the Matrix with our special guest, Dr. Alan Keyes. We've also got a question that we're going to pose to the Dr. Keyes as soon as we get back from the break.
You're listening to Inside the Matrix.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. We're here with Dr. Alan Keyes, and we're continuing our conversation. Before we get started back, we had a question from Ryan on Skype, and he was asking, Dr. Keyes, what do you think about the monuments being pulled down in the South?
Well, I think that it's a bad sign, and it's being done by people who are trying to erase the significance of our past as Americans. Mm-hmm. And they will tell you, we got to get these racists out of here and so forth and so on. But as I forget what famous person said it, but those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. Mm-hmm. And that's not absolutely true, but it's true in many senses. And I'm not sure that one can appreciate. I certainly wouldn't have as a child growing up. I wouldn't have appreciated what happened in the course of the 19th century. What was the significance and reality of how slavery came to an end and things like this, or even what it was, if people had erased it so that we didn't have to go back and confront the truth. And the truth is that the human race is always, and probably for the foreseeable future till Christ comes again, it's going to be a melange of people who are not absolutely perfect and not absolutely bad, but who do evil, but also good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you try to pretend that because Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, he could never do any good, then what about the people who are killing millions of innocent babies? A crime that I know rationally to be far worse than slavery.
Oh, yeah.
And yet these people will want somebody to think of them in terms of something other than just deep-dyed wickedness and evil, won't they?
Mm-hmm.
Because they'll look at themselves and they'll say, well, yeah, I did, but I also did this and that and the other thing. And some of them turn around and they raise decent families and they see the wrong of what they do. That's who we are. And I think when you have a country that has gone through that kind of saga that has come, and in America, I will say this, I've read a lot of history now of different countries in different parts of the world, and I know of no saga of any people in which, though evil was there, the fallen nature of man greatly manifest, but how many countries can you point to where every time things came to a head, the people of that country ended up doing their best to right the wrong, even when it cost them enormously, which the Civil War certainly did, civil rights movement certainly did, other things that we had to go through in America in urban areas and other things still ongoing. We know the price that has to be paid to try to make those steps forward. And we also know that time and again, decent Americans, some of whom had been part of the evil, turned around in order to make steps in the right direction. We don't want to forget that.
No.
But if you try to act as if slavery was never there, no bad enslavers were ever around, let's forget about all that, then you're going to forget the significance of that history, which has a message about evil, but also has a message about how you can defeat evil with good. If
Absolutely.
you can wake up the sense of that good in enough people.
And a big part of that, in my mind, is shining the light on what that evil is and what's going on in the world. And I've said many times in the show, I don't believe there is any perfection in this world. And every one of us has done things that we regret in our life, but hopefully we learn from it. And as far as the issue of slavery goes, it's still going on today.
Well, see, the thing that
in
really
different parts of the world.
Jimmy, the thing that really gets me about some of these folks, and a lot of them are involved in the business of trying to erase the everything associated with it, discredit all the founders, do everything you can to get rid of all of that sort of stuff. And the end result of what they're trying to do is enslave everybody.
Yes.
They want to
get
slavery so that they can have a free hand to establish a form of government that's going to enslave everyone in the society.
Yeah, they'll never tell you that, though.
They don't admit it.
No.
But I think if you pause for a little bit and think through all the different aspects of what they end up doing, it clearly, and I know they don't like people to talk about this. I bet Bernie Sanders doesn't want me to mention what I'm about to say. But there's not a single experiment in their socialism, communism, totalitarian garbage that didn't end up claiming the lives of not just a few people here and there, not just thousands of people, but millions and millions and millions of people systematically slaughtered, oppressed, tortured, sent to gulags. I mean, you name it. Mm-hmm. People were subjected to it so that this wicked ideology that has, I think, no real sense of morality. They play on moral indignation while violating every premise of morality there is.
Exactly. It's incredibly, incredibly hypocritical in so many ways. And we see this all the time. And, you know, speaking of what's going on in the government, now everything is literally just flying out, coming out. All the truth is coming out. And they're just scrambling at every avenue to try and stop the flow of information. But we have that ability now on the internet, although they are trying to close down our channels, close down anybody who tries to speak the truth, because it's revealing their corruption. so much of what we're seeing in with the Ukraine that they're trying to pin on Trump is the very thing that they're doing with these kickbacks.
Think about this. I have been trying, and others, just not just me, but one of the first things when all of this was coming out, and they were trying to make so much of that phone call he had with the Ukrainian president, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now here they are claiming that Trump is trying to coerce the Ukrainian president because of some personal quid pro quo of Trump's. First thing, you listen to the actual conversation, and it's quite obvious that what he's focused on is not about something personal for him. But when you look at the details of it, why was it absolutely wrong to shut down the investigation from an American point of view, from the point of view of the interests of the United States? It was wrong to shut down that investigation the way Joseph Biden did. He went into the Ukraine, forced them to fire the prosecutor who was carrying out an investigation of a company called Burisma, the energy company.
Yep.
And then you dig deeper, and people have dug deeper. And what does it turn out? It turns out that his son, Hunter Biden, was in the business of making, it started out, they were saying thousands and hundreds of thousands, and now it looks like it may be millions of dollars. From the position he had and the work he was doing, and used his relationship with his father, that is at least what appearances say, right?
Yeah.
In order to get the folks in the Obama administration to intervene and stop the investigation that was going to reveal what was going on.
Yep.
That looks like a high crime and misdemeanor.
Absolutely.
Because if you're the vice president of the United States and you do something so that your dynasty, could be your son or whoever, is going to have a lot of money flowing into its coffers, which is characteristic of some other people whose initials are Clinton. But leave that aside. When you do that sort of thing, that is literally quid pro quo stuff.
Exactly, but that's totally overlooked by mainstream. They just ignore that completely.
As I watch this song and dance going on now, where Nancy Pelosi tells us that there's impeachment, these articles impeach most important thing in the world, urgent, necessary, and so forth. They make a farce out of the whole process, right?
Yep.
Bringing up a bunch of witnesses where they don't have a case. Nothing that was presented in those hearings made a case for any form of malfeasance. The minute you realized, because here's the question I try to ask everybody. Once you learn about what Joe Biden did, and he did what Trump was accused of doing, he put pressure on the previous president to fire an investigator who was looking into something that involved his son. That's personal, right?
Yep. Yes.
That's an abuse of the power of the United States, holding up our money, which they were counting on and had been promised by some deal they had made with the Obama administration. And he was holding that up until that prosecutor was fired. And it looks like he did that in order to avoid a lot of stuff coming out about his family. And
yes,
I'm sitting here thinking to myself, now that looks like something really wrong. If you're the president of the United States, charged with seeing to it that the laws are faithfully executed, can you turn your back on something like that? Could you look at that and say, well, no, I can't touch that because somebody might think I'm going after him because he's maybe going to run against me sometime, or because he's a Democrat and so forth and so on? That's no excuse. Nope. When you're president of the United States, you're supposed to do your job, whether it's hurting Republicans or Democrats or whoever. You just do the job based on the facts, the same way a jury is supposed to do the job, based on the facts. And based on the facts, there was a reason to press the Ukrainian government to complete that investigation so we would know whether the people of the United States had been betrayed. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, exactly.
And if he hadn't done it for political reasons, then I think he'd be culpable. But Trump didn't hesitate. He went ahead.
And I think that it's been coming out now that we see this was an entire kickback scheme. That aid money, and it's not only in the Ukraine, but it's in China and other places as well. So this is their game. They get the U.S. to give these massive amounts of aid with the agreement to the receiving country that you're going to kick a lot of that back to these politicians in their offshore accounts, in their different corporations they've set up in
and a lot of it seems precisely to involve doing it a little bit by proxy because it's family members, it's this.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that. And the stuff that's coming out ought to be making it clear that they were simply trying to get out from under what was clearly something that revealed wrongdoing with a capital D for Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think is interesting is that some stuff's coming out also that people need to pay attention to, because while you're trying to figure out why this process is so cumbersome, I think it's because it's not only Democrats who have to do a song and dance to avoid the whole truth coming out about all that. But we'll see.
Yeah. I agree. There's plenty of Republicans. This is not really a partisan issue, the corruption. It's on both sides. And that's why Trump is, having such a rough time. He's got his own money, so that's what makes him totally unique. He doesn't have to depend on this corruption system, the kickback system, like our ex-friend Barry when he was in the office, who's now a multi-millionaire as a result of all of this. He doesn't need that money, so he doesn't need to be a part of that corrupt system. And this is what's really grinding them, because they've been riding the gravy train of the American people for so long and without anybody calling them out that, they're pulling out all the stops because they don't want that game to end.
I think there's a lot of truth in what you say. And obviously the other thing that's been pretty much highlighted, and I hope a lot of Americans are thinking it through seriously, we have a serious problem now with our permanent bureaucracy, the civil service, as it's called. And I think it's partly because they've been out of control on account of the Civil Service Act, which sort of put the civilian authorities who come into the government in a position where they were dealing with people who are essentially, on the basis of the Civil Service Act, have a form of tenure.
Yes.
A hold on their office that you can't get around. And they're supposed to be using that in an impartial way to serve whichever administration has come in to the best of their ability based on the facts and so forth and so on. It's obvious as anything can be when you look at all the shenanigans that were going on focused on favoring Hillary Clinton within that bureaucracy, that's shattered completely, and that they are now trying to make themselves the kingmaker part of the government. But if they become the kingmaker part, then the king is no longer being made by the American people, by the system of representation, by the representatives in the Congress and the presidency combining to represent the people's will. They're overthrowing the government, in effect.
And I think they basically already did. And now, there are people like Trump and others who are trying to unravel that. But it's a nasty thing to try and unravel because it's so entrenched. We have the Senior Executive Service, which was what you were referring to with these entrenched bureaucrats. They are, if they get fired from one job, and they come in at very high levels. I mean, we're, way up in the six figures. Whether they have experience or not, if they're a known ball player, if they're going to play ball with the corruption and they are groomed for that, then, they are given these cushy jobs. And if something happens where they get fired for some reason and something accidentally comes out in the news about what they're up to, well, they just could move to another agency and they continue right along. And, that Peter Strzok guy is a prime example. He was in the FBI and they kind of moved him out. And now he's CIA again. And I think he had one foot in each anyway. But, these people are in there.
How do you keep control of these people when they get tenure like this?
You can't.
And I look back, right, because several things were true. Before the Civil Service Act and so forth and so on, there was a sense in the 19th century, and you can see it figuring into the calculations of people after all the major elections where there were significant changes in the control of Congress by one party or another, right?
Yep.
And when that happened, what used to happen in the 19th century was they cleaned house up and down, all the way down to who was going to be the postmaster in the local things. It was going to be determined by who had supported the incoming administration or party, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the claim was during the so-called progressive era at the beginning, into the end of the 19th, into the beginning of the 20th century, that era was, they claimed that they needed to do something so that corruption of bureaucratic administration by partisan factionalism would be brought to an end. That's what they claimed to be doing.
Yeah.
But the problem is that let's say that for a little while there, and I'm not sure it was for very long, but for a little while there, something like what they hoped would happen was actually going on. I'm not sure it ever was, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But once the thing starts to break down, what is the major tool that can help to clean house if you have passed a law that says it's not routine to clean house every time the people have changed the composition of the Congress and the White House? See, because that used to assure that changes took place, right?
Yes.
That the same people couldn't develop over the course of decades an empire of bureaucratic, little bureaucratic fiefdoms and dukedoms and so forth and so on.
Yes.
Well, the way that was supposed to be done is called impeachment and removal of civil officers. And most Americans, I think, don't understand how unusual that was. And yet, if you go back and look at the founders and their discussions and their writings, the most important thing I would say everybody should read and keep it handy so you can go back and consult it is the Federalist Papers.
Absolutely.
Because they contain a lot of things. Now, you're not going to agree with everything, our argument that's made in the Federalist Papers, I don't think. But you will see the arguments that were made. And you'll see the reasoning that went into doing certain things. And you'll realize that certain things we're dealing with, these were considerations that came into their thinking.
Yes.
And one of the reasons we have impeachment and removal of all the civil officers in the government, including the justices on the Supreme Court, including the president and the vice president and all the members of the executive branch, all those people can be removed. And though they have lied about it, if you go look at the Constitution, you will find, they'll tell you, some of them anyway, I don't know if they still persist and try to make this argument, that it requires a 2/3 majority in the Senate for everyone who's being impeached. And that's just not true. Because it's very specific, the context where that's mentioned. It says, it assigns the power to try impeachments, that is to say, accusations or charges brought by the House, right?
Yes.
But the power to try those impeachments is assigned to the Senate. And there are things they talk about, the oath they have to take and so forth. And it says, and it says, when the president is being tried, the Chief Justice will preside. Now that's important. We could talk about that at some point because people need to ask themselves, what difference does that make? And it makes a huge difference if you understand what's going on and the founders, or what's supposed to go on, and the founders did. But when the president is being tried, the Chief Justice shall preside. It means the trial can't take place unless the Chief Justice is in the chair as the presiding judge, as it were, right?
Yes.
That's the first thing. And there's a colon. A colon is a grammatical little indicator that what is about to be said is linked to what was just said, right? Mm-hmm. So it links basically two sentences together. So when the president is being tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without a 2/3 majority in the Senate. That clearly applies the 2/3 to the president only, not to all the other civil officers. That would mean that every time you get a majority in the House and the Senate of the same persuasion, where people have the same inclinations, right, about certain things, a majority vote is all it takes to impeach the civil officers, including, by the way, the justices of the Supreme Court. Imagine some of the absolute departures from the common sense and moral understanding of the American people that we wouldn't have to live with if people were looking at that and saying, oh, wait a minute. If it is a strong feeling amongst people around the country that that Supreme Court decision does not reflect the Constitution, then they can elect a Congress that feels the same way, and they can be impeached and removed.
Yeah, and that brings to mind that ridiculous ruling that corporations are people. You remember that?
The ridiculous ruling that treats them as if they're persons in the human sense. Ridiculous ruling, a law that was passed and accepted by them that you can't sue pharmaceutical companies when they are using untested vaccines that harm people.
Exactly.
I think that's outrageous.
Oh,
It's just
yeah,
crazy.
it's absolutely
And
insane.
it's a matter of law, and they accepted it. Court
Yep.
accepted it, and things like that. So they would have to be wary, and for a long time they were. They weren't good at that. But by the way, that's one of the reasons it took so long, and I'll grant this as a problem, to get rid of slavery. Because they couldn't make judgments that simply flew in the face of public feeling, even if it was prejudicial. Right?
Yep.
And that means, and I don't know that this is entirely a bad thing. It's not entirely a bad thing that you can't just dictate the end, even of something you know to be unjust. You must do it by reviving the common sense and appealing to the moral judgment, purpose, intention, and understanding of the people. And because otherwise, you're going to slide fairly quickly into totalitarian, despotic dictatorship.
And we're heading that direction quickly, but we do see the resistance, and we're part of that, and we're going to continue having a strong moral compass and encouraging others to do it as well. Once again, we're up against the break. You're listening to Inside the Matrix with Dr. Alan Keyes. We'll be back in just a few minutes, so please stick around with us. If you have a question, please pop in the chat and pose it to us or call on Skype. Either way, we'd be happy to answer your questions, and we hope you're enjoying the show. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're here with our special guest, Dr. Alan Keyes. And as we get rolling along here, there's two things that I've always, and I know I'm not the only person, I'm sure you've mentioned this many times, but there's two things that we absolutely have to figure out with our government system that is really hurting us badly. And one is term limits, and the other one is money, pay for play, lobbyists, and all that kind of stuff, because we've really seen how that has just trashed our, the Congress, and it just made a mockery of, our government. And as your point is so well taken, that these people, not only the bureaucrats get entrenched for 20, 30, 40 years, but we also have, these congressmen in there like that too.
Well, sadly, I think that's true. I have actually said for many years and written a lot of work, or written a lot of articles and other things like this on the fact that if you look back at the history of our country, there were several times in the course of our history in the 19th century, basically. It didn't happen in the 20th century, and hasn't happened up to now since then, pretty much. Though attempts were made right at the very beginning of the 20th century, and that was the residue of the 19th century arrangements. And what I'm talking about is the fact that periodically, the first parties in America were something called the Democratic Republican Party, both names together, right? Mm-hmm. That was Jefferson's, which then just becomes the Democrat Party. Usually people identify that changeover with Andrew Jackson, yeah? Mm-hmm. And we started out having a Federalist Party. You never hear about that anymore because the Federalist Party is gone. Yep. The Federalist Party became the Whigs. They were replaced by the Whigs. And the Whigs were then eventually replaced by the Republican Party. And in each case of those changes, it was because the people of the country had outgrown the party system. The party system that was there in the beginning with the Federalists dominating, that was at a time when, even though I think the founders were sincerely committed to representative government, they came out of an ethos that had been aristocratic, right?
Yes.
And so there was a tendency in the early era of the Republic to defer and to have a party that pretty much thought of itself as a kind of aristocratic representation of the people. They were sincerely committed to elections and so forth and so on, which is why I guess they eventually fell prey to the changes that were going on as the population increased, as people moved away from the East Coast into the interior, and as you started to have forces come to bear that were more democratic in nature. And democratic means of the people, not of an elite amongst the people.
Right.
And insofar as there were elites in places that were formed in the era when people started moving into what I guess you would sort of call the near West, that would have been places like the one I'm in right now, Tennessee, Kentucky, areas like this. And that's when you started to see a rise of populism that changed the demands that were being made on the system. And people generally identified the success of Andrew Jackson in reaching the presidency, winning out over the Federalist Party that had held the office for so long. That's when that came into existence. And a shift occurred because the people had changed in their character, right? Mm-hmm. And in what they demanded. The battle over slavery eventually led to the emergence of the Republican Party, though that wasn't the only thing involved, because other things that were involved was the changing nature of the society, the fact that you were seeing developments in the northern states with the beginning, the murmurings of industrialization, the movement of people into western areas that making demands that would reward going out to the wilderness, building up the farms and so forth and so on, the need for canals and all of these other things that had to go into that. All of this made a difference in what people thought should be the activity of the national government and of government in general. And that was reflected in party change. How come we survived the 20th century and we still have these two parties claiming, and we now describe ourselves as a two-party system, right? Why?
Yeah, exactly.
There should be as many parties as the people think are necessary. And we shouldn't have ever allowed any of these parties to entrench themselves in a way that prevents competition. And that's exactly what we have done.
And they do.
And I think that we are suffering the consequences now. And both parties have become alienated from their base. And Donald Trump's success was due to that fact. One party's gone overboard down this communist socialist road, and the other party has gone overboard serving the interests of corporate persons over the interests of human persons.
Absolutely.
And that's not what our Constitution is supposed to be about. And so I think it's not just a question of money in politics. It's a question of the fact that the structure of politics is no longer such as to open the parties to real challenges. We're letting them do everything they can to make sure that there can't be an emerging alternative to one or both of these parties. If there had been, by the way, I think that the Republican Party would have been the first that had to face the music. And an alternative would have come forward that rejected their surrender to government centralization. Mm-hmm. Because the Republicans have rolled over and played dead as we watched the federal government devour more and more so-called responsibility and money. Yep. And as the state and local government started to be pushed into oblivion. The Republican base didn't want that, but they got it from this party because it was favoring the ambitions and power of the folks they were electing and of the party bosses that were able to perpetuate themselves. So I have argued for a long time that we need to be thinking about, as a grassroots, as people, how we start fighting for the right to look away from all this party structure and look for the people who really represent us, not two alternatives that are coming forward with slightly different versions of the same junk.
Well put. You know, so many politicians are, I always say, are wholly owned subsidiaries of many corporations. And the other thing is that we've got media, you know, backing up this crazy globalist agenda. And now we see the insanity of them not ever having to tell the truth whatsoever. It's a propaganda game now. And so
I have to say, Jimmy, I think, sadly, you said not ever having to tell the truth. I think they're mostly being forced to tell lies now. That's what I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's how far it's gotten. It's so far the other way. It's absolutely crazy. And really, in a constitutional republic like we're supposed to have, the media plays an incredibly important role for the people, because most of the people are busy trying to take care of their families and pay the rent, you know, pay their mortgage, make a living. And they're not there to, you know, ferret out and figure out who's doing what to whom and how, you know, we're being taken advantage of, because they just don't have the time. And our society has really been engineered that way. So that leaves that job to the media, to supposedly honest journalists who go out there and look at these things and tell us the truth about what's happening. But we don't have that at all. And now what's happened is it's shifted. The major medias are absolutely liars and propagandists. And then there's, you know, people like you who have started your channel and this radio network and a bunch of others. We're the ones that have to take up the mantle of trying to bring the truth to the people.
Well, you know, you and I were talking a little briefly before we came on the air about the tremendous role that technology has played.
Yes.
In literally, I mean, I remember when this word was used to death, but I'm going to use it right now because I think the technology had the potential to empower grassroots people, so that the idea that American politics is supposed to be based on, which is the initiative of people at the grassroots, organizing around their common sense of what is needed for their families, their communities, and their country. And lifting up people who represent that sense and organizing themselves to get those people elected. And the internet obviously was starting to energize that process in all kinds of ways and still has the potential to do so. But what tells you that we're now dealing with a system that's entrenched in the hands of a little what I call elitist faction. Now, I'm not disparaging elites, by the way. I think the word elite means people who are outstanding in some way in any given field or area. And one of the great things about America is that we actually encourage people to do their best. And if they become outstanding in a given field, don't mind at all seeing them rewarded for their efforts, do we?
As long as they're not evil.
Well, as long as they're not violating, you know, the basic laws and sense of justice and so forth.
Yes.
But we, I think, don't begrudge them success. It's part of what does incentivize people who want to come to America because they've got what they used to call a career that's open to talent. If you've got the ability, nobody's going to be able to sit on you and keep you from accomplishing as much as you can. And we could say, well, that used to be the past and so forth, but you can't look at Microsoft, Bill Gates. Who are these people who are now the heads of all these billionaire corporations and stuff? Back in the 70s and 80s, no, they were regular folks building computers in their garage and figuring out the programming and doing various things. So we still have a society where there's the possibility that somebody of no name, no background, no family that anybody ever respected before can rise and do something that is then rewarded by the choice of the people in the marketplace. That's why I have remained a free enterprise advocate, because I think that that's the way it's supposed to be in a free society. But unfortunately, we've also allowed the development of a cliquish, elitist faction organizational sense in our politics. And what they have been struggling with because of the internet is how they can take what they were developing of this media control you talk about and make sure that the internet doesn't provide us with a way around it. A way that we can continue to develop the strength, initiative, and sense of responsibility. See, because I think a lot of people sit on their hands thinking, I can't do anything, I can't really have an effect. But when you see the tools that are available to regular folks to communicate with each other, we now have no excuse.
That's true.
And I think that what they're trying to do is shut that down so that people will feel helpless and passive and not realize that they can, if they will, organize themselves so that their common sense of right and wrong and of justice and injustice and of opportunity and obstacle can again be operative as the determining factor in elections and therefore in the way our government represents us. I think representative government is dying in this country because these folks have wised up, and one of the things they've done through the techno giants, what I call the tech tyrants, right?
Yep.
You do realize they're now practicing the very censorship that our Constitution forbids. Government's not doing it. They're doing it on behalf of their cronies who are elements of government, right?
Yes.
And we're supposed to be too stupid to figure this out.
That's what they say.
And I think that that's posing a serious, deep challenge to the self-government of the American people. And I keep wondering because I, as you know, very much approve of a lot of the things where President Trump has been keeping his promises. Only hesitation I had about Donald Trump was, will he really keep these promises, right? Which is, by the way, a salutary hesitation to have about every politician you meet, including me. You got to put that question on the table and keep it on the table and keep judging it by events and facts, not about some emotional commitment you made, because that's going to get you into trouble.
Yes.
But so I think that's a question that's on the table. And one of the areas that's really been bothering me, we have now a constitution that says that you can't interfere with the free exercise of religion, and you can't interfere with the freedom of speech or of the press, what we these days would call the media, right?
Right.
But that media now includes what you and I are doing right this minute.
Yes.
And freedom of speech always included that. And the government really didn't find a good way around that. It's the one area where the courts have more or less done what they're supposed to do and safeguard individual prerogatives to a certain degree, right?
Right.
Now they figured it out, though. Oh, we can shut them all down and pretend that this is being done by a private corporation. Well, excuse me for saying so, y'all. Why is everybody suddenly forgetting that there are civil rights acts on the books? And civil rights acts are actually not about skin color. Everybody thinks, oh, that's all about race. No, it's not. It was all about rights and essentially about civil liberties and their protection in the Constitution. And if people were, in a discriminatory way, shutting people down and shutting their mouths and shutting them off, they have committed an offense that is prosecutable under the law. And I'm wondering why that's not being done. Why they're pretending that the Bill of Rights, which they always used to talk about, right? Whenever they want to do something bad, they can always talk about the Bill of Rights. But when the Bill of Rights gets in the way of their wickedness, then they want us all to forget it's there. But that Bill of Rights was interpreted as meaning that you don't get to keep people out of public accommodations based on discriminatory criteria. Well, right now, I got to tell you, Christians and conservatives of all varieties and persuasions are being discriminated against by the tech tyrants.
Absolutely.
And if people running restaurants and Macy's can't discriminate, how come they're getting away with it?
Because they're part of the evilarchy.
Well, they're not being called on it.
Yeah,
and
they're
I'm a
not.
little disappointed because I think they're working against President Trump, and he ought to be kicking the butt of the folks over there in the Justice Department to get busy preventing and stopping this censorship, which is a direct attack, not on individuals. See, they always try to act as if it's individuals, but it's like the Second Amendment and other things. a lot of the things talked about in those first 10 amendments include a phrase, the right of the people.
Mm-hmm.
See, that means, and of course, you can't respect the rights of the people unless you respect the individual rights of each person composing the people. But it's not just an individual right. If they're attacking our ability to talk to one another, to gather information, to see all points of view that we want to see, they're interfering with our function as citizens, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
And by the way, y'all, citizen equals an office or duty that is our office under the Constitution. And because we are the body of the people who choose the ministers and legislators, we actually represent, when we go into the voting booth, the sovereign body. Right? Because those are decisions made by a sovereign to choose the people who are going to be highest in the government and make the laws and all that. That's a sovereign decision, kind of thing that used to be done only by kings and queens and emperors. We're doing it through the ballot box. But if they're interfering with our ability to gather information, to share views, to deliberate, because that's what our conversation is. It's as if they're getting into the mind of the founder with drugs, or of the sovereign with drugs and everything, and preventing the sovereign from being aware of or thinking about things that are vital to the decisions the sovereign has to make. That would be regarded as a direct attack on the body of the sovereign, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
And that direct attack is a form of treason. How come they're not going after it as such?
I'm really hoping that a lot of these indictments will move forward this year, because if you're ever going to do it, and it makes political sense to actually do it in a big election year and have it fresh in the minds of the people, I'm hoping that that's what the strategy is, because there certainly has been plenty of time to gather evidence of wrongdoing against a lot of these politicians, and charges could have been brought a long time ago, years ago. But for some reason, it's being delayed, and you have to worry about some of this because, as we said, it's so entrenched in these bureaucrats, in the Justice Department, in the FBI. I mean, we're seeing evidence of that. These people have an agenda. They're not for the people. They're for their own system, and they've been riding the gravy train for so many years. They don't want that to be messed up. So we have to really hope that this is going to be the year, because I think if we don't take it back this year, and if we don't have a massive, voting turnout to where people will vote for those who want to stand up for us, I don't know. It may be all over. I don't see how we recover.
I think several things occur to me as you're saying that, because I think it's all very true. One of them is that it's good to bring all these things up and demand action during an election year, but it's especially important right now, because if people really see a difference in Donald Trump, right, and look at what he is doing and see the hope that we can really try to get things cleaned up, as the drain the swamp phrase suggests, then one of the things that needs to be cleaned up is the ability of the well-heeled political machines and the tech tyrants and others to rig our elections to go this way or that according to their will, to turn them into a farce.
Yes.
Where we turn out at the polls, but where for various reasons and through various mechanisms, they're actually able to skew the vote, either through the manipulation of information, which discourages participation, which deprives people of information about what the alternatives are and so forth and so on. Or what also rears its ugly head is the actual business of cheating in ways that are now complicated by the fact that you can cheat at our elections these days, and only a handful of people in the world will understand what you did because it's all being done electronically.
Yep.
So I think we need to be demanding that. Step one, we need the truth about what these tech tyrants are up to, and we need them to call them to order. And that usually means taking the responsible parties into court and saying what you're doing violates the law and you've got to stop. And we're going to impress you with that by fining you until it hurts if you don't stop.
Well, Trump Trump, yeah, I agree. And Trump did have his own little conference talking about these very issues. So we're going to have to wait and see how that's going to turn out. And I hope it really becomes an enforcement issue that they will act upon.
Because I think he has to do it because they're going to try to defeat him through all these nefarious means. That's what I think they're going to try to do.
Absolutely. Oh, we're up against the break. The time is flying by. You're listening to Inside the Matrix with Dr. Alan Keyes, our guest. And we just have a few minutes here in our last segment. So if you have any questions or anything that you want to pose to Dr. Keyes, please pop it in the chat or through Skype. And we'll be back in just a few minutes. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to our final segment of this show. And one thing that I wanted to discuss with you, Dr. Keyes, is the dumbing down of America, the systematic dumbing down of our culture, our education system. And I think that this has also played a role in, what we're seeing happening today, in that people don't even know what their rights are. They aren't taught those things in school. The family unit has been, seriously disrupted through legislation and media propaganda, things like that. It's a big problem, don't you think?
I do. And I think it's motivated also by a big problem, which is that I believe that we now have a large clique, very powerful in this country, that doesn't want people to develop the capacity to use their citizen role effectively. And so they've consciously gone into the schools, and they no longer teach the founding, really, because the founding includes a lot of ideas they hate. And they can't have people be reminded that this country is actually founded on ideas that, well, let's start with the one that I think just personally is most important, but also rationally. And that is, if you came into the world as a people claiming that you had the right of self-government because of the laws of nature and of nature's God, how long will you keep your self-government if you let some elitist clique convince you that there is no God?
Exactly.
See? And who's hurt by that, by the way? See, because what was always the big question when you read history is how come in most places, most of the time, a little clique of people, maybe they amounted to sometimes, scores or maybe hundreds, very rarely in very large country, maybe thousands, and they'd be little aristocrats and oligarchs and people like this, and they were ruling over thousands, hundreds of thousands, and eventually scores of millions of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet they figured out a way that the many would rule the few and not be faced with the anger and results of all those people being oppressed. The many ruled over the few because it requires leadership for people to work together.
Yeah.
And once you lift up that leadership, it occurs to them that all they got to do is set up what would be called in economics a cartel, where they make a little arrangement that they're not going to have to pay too much of a price in order to maintain their power. And since everybody's helping everybody else out to maintain that situation, they can keep a whole bunch of people down who look to them as the leader and think, oh, that guy's going to take care of us or she's going to take care of us. And they're not taking care of you at all. They're just taking care of themselves.
Exactly.
See? And America was actually founded on a premise, and the founders said it all the time, that the key to maintaining self-government is knowledge, information, education. And what is it that they're trying to keep from us now? They don't want us to know what's in the Constitution. A whole lot of drivel is out there now. And the minute you go read the words of the Constitution, you say to yourself, but what they just said on TV is wrong. For instance, I was reading an article of all places the other day, WorldNet Daily. And there was a big headline that the Chief Justice Roberts is just a figurehead at the trial of the president, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's not true. Alan, why isn't that true? That isn't true because the presiding officer of the Senate, in the usual course of their business, is somebody they can remove from the chair. By a vote, they can remove that person from the chair. One of these days, people are going to realize that the vice president is actually the president of the Senate.
That's
and
right.
ask themselves what's going to happen on the day a vice president wakes up to the fact that the Senate can't remove him from the chair. But leave that aside. But the founders, I think, were thinking about that explicitly when they put the Chief Justice in there, because Hamilton says that it would be a bad idea if you had involved the Supreme Court as the court of impeachments. And it's because the person who is convicted and removed can still be tried under our regular laws. And then if there were appeals that would go to a court that had already convicted him in the trial that removed him from office, that wouldn't be fair, would it? That's double jeopardy, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so to avoid that eventuality, they didn't see that you should hand it over to this court. And Hamilton said that there would be the same difficulties if you involved the court in the impeachment trial along with the Senate. What good is done? And then he says, but the advantages that would have come from involving the Supreme Court will come from involving the Chief Justice. Nobody ever bothers to ask, how could there be any advantages if the Senate's just on its own doing whatever it wants? Well, it's not on its own because the presiding judge gets to rule on a whole bunch of things very important to the process. And all these things they're pretending to figure out in the Senate are subject to the veto of the Chief Justice. He can say no, because in our courts of law, the presiding judge is the one who decides whether the prosecution has presented enough prima facie evidence to justify and warrant a trial. And when they talk about dismissal, the Senate doesn't. I don't see anywhere in the Constitution where it says the Senate can dismiss the charges without looking at them and trying them. No. But the Chief Justice can prevent a trial from taking place by saying, I'm not going to sit in that chair. And you, therefore, under the Constitution, cannot have a valid trial until you guys correct this mess you made of the investigation. That's what really ought to happen right now, because the thing in the House was a travesty.
Absolutely.
And it had no resemblance to an investigation that was conducted with proper respect for what constitutes valid evidence, valid testimony, and so forth. Didn't care, and you and I both know it.
Yep.
Just stood up there, Schiff, and lied his butt off.
He did.
And I think, and then presented witnesses that didn't say anything about anything that had to do with criminal activity or proof of anything wrongdoing. It was all, and when they did talk about, just assertions.
Yeah.
No argument,
firsthand
no
knowledge.
evidence, nothing. No firsthand knowledge. I mean, it was a farce. It was a sham. It was a travesty.
Yeah.
And if we had, and I'm afraid that Chief Justice Roberts doesn't have this kind of real. Well, it's both a combination of guts and integrity. I don't see it, and everybody seems to agree with me, because what he should say, when they're saying they're going to commence the trial, is to say, how can you commence a trial if you don't have a presiding judge? And I won't sit in that chair until the act is cleaned up, because no case has been made. In other words, there's usually a hearing, and the judge gets to take a look at what the prosecution is proposing, and the defense gets to question whether what they're proposing is sufficient evidence, and then the judge decides which of them is right, right?
Correct.
That should happen, but it's not the Senate's job to do that. It's the job of the presiding judge, and that presiding judge is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. But I'm not at all sure that Roberts, though I'm pretty sure he's smart enough to know that's his job, I'm not sure he will assert it as his job. And the second thing that he has to do is make sure they're pretending we're going to make up all the procedures and do whatever we want, and that'll be by vote of the Senate. That's not true, because there, too, the presiding officer gets that. Well, wait a minute. Where are the witnesses for the defense? Why isn't this being conducted according to due process? Because the Constitution says that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property, and the responsibilities of office are the property of the person elected to that office, until and unless he is charged with some malfeasance and removed, right? There are responsibilities that belong to that person and powers that go along with meeting that responsibility that belong to that person. So you can't deprive the president or any other civil officer unless due process is followed. And that's what the Chief Justice, the presiding judge, does in our courts everywhere. And they're acting as if the Senate gets to totally ignore all that and do whatever it can vote into. That's not true. That's not true. What they get to vote on is whether, after the case has been made, they believe that the person is guilty of the charges. That's what jurors vote on. And everybody forgets, they're not sitting there as the U.S. Senate, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're sitting there as the court of impeachments. And in the court of impeachments, they are the jurors. Who are the jurors, by the way? The jurors are the body of people. Could be 6, could be 12, could be whatever numbers provided by law. In this case, it's 100 because there were 100 senators and it's the whole Senate. But they are sworn. And what tells me that they're supposed to be treated as jurors, not as the Senate controlling everything, is that they take a separate oath before they sit down to make a judgment about the impeachment of the president. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, that's very interesting. I didn't know that.
They don't, the oath that they swear to be part of the Senate is not good enough. They must take a separate oath that they're going to perform the duty of jurors. Who are jurors? Jurors are the judges of guilt or innocence. They are judges, but they're only the judges of that. Guilt or innocence based on the facts presented at trial and the exposition of the law given at trial, right? Yep. Who's responsible for making sure the facts are properly presented, the witnesses are properly presented, and that the law is properly understood? The presiding judge.
Yes.
And so the whole notion they've been spreading around that the Senate's in charge of this whole process is a lie. And people need to go back to the Constitution and think it through.
It's a little worrisome to me because given Robert's past history, he rolled over on Obamacare and said it was constitutional when everybody knew it wasn't.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, what have they got on him? Because so many people, blackmail is definitely part and parcel of politics.
Well, if he doesn't handle this trial with scrupulous regard for due process and for making sure that the president is given a fair shake, right?
Yep.
And that fair shake should be given because right now, in addition to everything else, they've conducted hearings in the House, and those hearings didn't establish any evidence of wrongdoing, but they did continually slander and libel the president.
Yes, they did.
And are we supposed to just sit and take that? I think it would be unfair if the truth and the true exposition wasn't allowed to appear before the public before they have to go to the polls and vote. But I think that, as you and I were talking about in the first part of the program, there's reason to suspect that there are some folks sitting in the Republican leadership who don't want all that laundry washed out in public.
I think you're absolutely correct, because this is, the corruption is pretty much across the board. And I would venture that there's no more than a dozen, if that, of people who are really on the up and up in federal politics. That's incredibly sad to have to say that. But if you look at what they do and what they've been doing for decades, they are not serving the people. They are serving themselves and their corporations and the banks, the big money. That's it. And they give lip service to us, but they don't actually do what they say they're going to do.
I'll just give one example, and I try to be careful because part of what I am encouraging is we need to be more aware of these possibilities and insist on investigations that will get to the facts, right?
Yes.
Because you don't want to be speaking in advance of the facts. But I read stuff that convinced me, and since I'm speaking here of somebody who's no longer part of the scene, I think one can safely allude to it as a possibility. Mm-hmm. But it was noted in articles that I read some time back, this was a while ago, that when you looked at John McCain, for example, guess where a number of his top people who had served him in various positions on campaigns, and I think even in his Senate office, where they ended up in the interim between different political outings. Some of them went to perch. It was in an institution that was funded by your good friend of mine, George Soros.
Oh.
Doesn't that strike you as a little suspicious?
Absolutely. It's
coming
disgusting.
From somebody who is supposed to be a leader in the Republican Party?
Oh, yeah. We know McCain was completely dirty.
And I think when you've pondered that, And remember, when the light comes on, that roach you see is just the one roach you see. You ought to be worrying about the ones you don't see.
Yeah. And that is why they're fighting so hard against Trump, because, he's got the little roach light.
Yes, and if you had an actual, decent, non-libelous, non-slanderous, serious effort to establish what was really going on. And the key thing is the one I was talking about. Did he actually have, and I think the answer is absolutely, definitely yes, was there evidence that an investigation was required into what led Joe Biden to commit the very offense, pressuring a foreign government contrary to the best interest of the United States, to end an investigation when he was stood to personally, within his universe, including his family, gain from ending that investigation? That was, and it's been out there now in the public. A lot of people listening must know about it, right?
Yes.
That's been established. The facts are on the table that suggest that needs to be investigated. That's what Trump was talking about to the Ukrainian president, and he wasn't committing some high crime or misdemeanor. He was doing his job.
Yeah, and we even have a reciprocal agreement with Ukraine that was put in place, I believe, in the Clinton administration, that we would cooperate in matters of crimes in both countries. Right. So he's actually fulfilling his obligation.
That's right.
To look into criminal activity.
Now, don't you think all of this should come out in the Senate trial? I think that whole argument needs to be laid out chapter and verse with all its various implications. That will require getting into what was going on at Burisma, Hunter Biden, whether or not Joe Biden was truthful when he said he didn't know anything about what was going on and stuff like this. And he needs to remember, by the way, when he's out there blustering about how he's not going to appear, that he's a private citizen now.
Yeah.
And that in point of fact, the Senate, in this instance, has, under the law, subpoena power. And that subpoena power can, in fact, be executed through the officers of the Senate. And I bet, leave aside officers of the Senate, they could probably get some cooperation from the president. Make sure that the truth is being served and that the subpoenas are being acted upon. Who knows? So when Joe Biden says, I refuse to testify, I'm wondering if he's going to get away with that. He wouldn't in any court of law, I know.
Well, lately, he's actually said that he would. I saw a couple of articles where he said that he would testify. But he's going to lie his ass off.
Well, see, but the thing about lying when you're under oath in front of the whole country is that when people start to bring the evidence out, they get to make the case that shows you to be a liar. Which done. I'm not sure he wants. That's why he was thinking he wouldn't come, because he doesn't want to be shown up as somebody who hasn't been telling the truth, or either he hasn't been telling the truth or he doesn't know things he should have known. Yeah. And that doesn't qualify you for president, does it?
We know absolutely, they set this up. Well, Pelosi's son is involved in Ukraine, too, with one of these companies. And so is Kerry's son-in-law. I mean, and...
that's one of those things that gives you the tip of the iceberg feeling.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think they're absolutely crazy for doing what they did, because if this thing really gets investigated, it's all going to come back to them. All of it. They're going to see the whole pay-for-play kickback scheme, that's been put in place by them. It's all going to come out if they go to it, and start bringing evidence.
Well, see, I think that would mean that the unjustifiable, libelous, slanderous attack on the president of the United States could very well bring out a reality that would then lead people to realize that this party system is now rotten to the core, and it's time for what has been called in our history a realignment, so that people will build a party or parties that actually reflect the best interests of the country, the common sense of the people, and the moral conscience.
Gee, what a concept. Oh, unbelievable. Moral relativism has been in place way, way too long.
And I think has become kind of worse as we go along, and I pretty much can't talk in public without making one appeal for this, because I think it's the symptom of our loss of moral conscience, and that's this whole abortion issue, everything implied in it.
Ugh.
A country starts out with an appeal to the laws of nature and nature's God, to an understanding that the first and foremost right is the right to life, the one that's listed first.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have people coming forward and think they're making a good argument. I read one the other day where people were basically trying to make an argument. How do you recognize a right? You recognize a right when you're having to force somebody else to do something with their property, their time, their labor, talent, or money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I read that and I said, but wait a minute. And this was a conservative writing. And I said, wait a minute. If you applied that strictly, what is it that is involved in the perpetuation of the human race? It is people having children, right?
Yes.
People called women, and the process of having a child, as I recall, is referred to as labor.
Mm-hmm.
So the right to life is a right that actually involves saying that you have to give your labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that somebody else can enjoy their life. And what government requires that you do that? Well, in the first instance, according to the Declaration of Independence, it's the government of God.
That's
to
right.
whom we appealed for our liberty. So one is going to have to do some more thinking about what a right is in order to get back to the Declaration and understand a right is that which is right because of the authority of God. And
Absolutely.
then you're going to get your sense of your rights straight. We don't have the absolute freedom to do whatever we want. We have the freedom to do what
is right
according
Yes.
to the judgment and laws of Almighty God. And why is that important to Americans? Because that's not about human power. It's about respect for God's authority, which then empowers people who are acting accordingly to stand against those who are trying to deprive them and deter them from walking the path that God requires.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Keys, for being our guest. We're running out of time. You only got a few seconds left. Please tell us where we can find you.
Well, you can find me right now. You can go to Facebook for IMTV, right? IMTV, type it in, or Brighteon, where you can get all of the shows. We have a Brighteon channel that's IMTV Media. Mm-hmm. So you go to Brighteon, you go to the channel section, and you type in, you go to the channel section and you type in IAMTV Media, all one word, and you'll find all my shows and everything.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Look forward to discussing things with you in the future. So
thank you
everybody.
For having me. I really enjoyed it. God bless you.
Great. God bless you too. God bless all the listeners. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
This is Inside the Matrix, hosted by Jimmy Brent.
Who are we talking about?
Jimmy Brent. Live every Sunday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It is worldwide.
Broadcasting from an undisclosed location deep within the neon capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. For more information on the host and the show, please visit InsideTheMatrix.org. That's InsideTheMatrix.org. It's time to break the chains of manipulated consciousness and claim our true nature as creative, divine beings. Inside the Matrix. Inside the Matrix.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.